Welcome to Thought Grid. Tonight, we delve deeper into the unsettling phenomenon of liminal spaces, those transitional, often forgotten places that exist on the fringes of our perception. They are the empty corridors, the deserted waiting rooms, the abandoned schools, and the quiet hours of the night when the world seems to hold its breath. These are not just physical locations. They are states of being, moments of eerie stillness where the familiar becomes profoundly unsettling. The stories you're about to hear come from real people who claim to have experienced the chilling, disorienting nature of these spaces, where the line between reality and something else entirely blurs. Prepare to question what you thought you knew about the mundane, for sometimes the most terrifying horrors lurk in the spaces we least expect. Story 1. The Infinite Office Building. Our first account comes from a night security guard named Michael, a man who had spent years patrolling the silent, empty halls of corporate buildings. He considered himself unflappable, accustomed to the eerie quiet and the occasional strange noise. But one night, in a seemingly ordinary office building, his routine patrol turned into a descent into a chilling, impossible reality. It was a Friday, just after midnight. Michael was on his usual rounds, checking doors, ensuring all lights were off and the alarms were set. He was on the 5th floor, a floor usually bustling with activity during the day, but now utterly deserted. The only sounds were the soft hum of the ventilation system and the distant whir of the elevators. He was about to head down to the next floor when he noticed a door slightly ajar, a door that should have been locked. It led to a rarely used storage room filled with old office furniture and forgotten files. Curiosity, perhaps a sense of duty, compelled him to investigate. He pushed the door open further and stepped inside. The room was dark and the air was stale, thick with the smell of dust and old paper. He flicked on his flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom, illuminating stacks of boxes and draped furniture. He took a few steps in, scanning the room, when he felt a strange shift in the air, a subtle pressure that made his ears pop. He turned to leave, but the door he had entered through was gone. In its place was a solid, unmarked wall, indistinguishable from the rest of the room. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the back of his neck. He tried to rationalize it, thinking he must have somehow turned around without realizing it. He fumbled for his radio, but there was no signal. His flashlight flickered, then died, plunging him into near total darkness. He fumbled for his backup light, his heart hammering against his ribs. When the beam finally cut through the gloom, he found himself in a different place. The storage room was gone. In its place was an endless expanse of identical office cubicles, stretching as far as the eye could see. The fluorescent lights above hummed with an unnatural intensity, casting long, distorted shadows. The air was heavy, stagnant, and smelled faintly of stale coffee and ozone. He was in a liminal space, an infinite office building that existed outside the normal confines of his reality. He tried to retrace his steps, but every corridor looked identical. The cubicles were a monotonous beige, the carpet a dull gray. He walked for what felt like hours, his sense of direction completely gone. The hum intensified, sometimes fading, sometimes surging as if the very air was breathing. He started to feel a profound sense of dread, a primal fear that he was not alone. He kept telling himself it was just his imagination, a trick of the mind brought on by exhaustion and fear. Then he heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible sound, like the distant click of a keyboard or the rustle of paper. It was too soft to pinpoint, but it was there, a subtle counterpoint to the oppressive silence. He froze, his breath catching in his throat. The hum seemed to quiet slightly, as if even the environment was holding its breath. He slowly turned his head, his flashlight beam trembling. In the distance, at the end of a long, identical corridor, he saw it. A figure, hunched over a cubicle, its back to him. It was motionless, unnaturally still, He couldn't make out any details, only its silhouette against the flickering fluorescent lights. He didn't wait. He turned and ran, the faint sounds of clicking and rustling echoing behind him. Closer now. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs aching, weaving through the endless cubicles, the beige walls blurring into a nauseating streak. He could hear the sounds gaining on him, the clicks and rustles growing louder, punctuated by what sounded like a soft, wet sigh. He stumbled, falling to his knees, his flashlight skittering across the floor. He scrambled to retrieve it, his heart pounding like a drum against his ribs. When he looked up, the figure was there, just meters away, its head still hunched over, its back still to him. He couldn't make out its features, only its immense stillness and the terrifying soft sighs it emitted. He closed his eyes, bracing for the inevitable. But then, just as the figure seemed to lean closer, the world seemed to twist. The hum surged to an unbearable crescendo, and he felt a sensation like falling, a disorienting lurch that made his stomach churn. When he opened his eyes, he was back in the storage room, lying on the dusty floor, his flashlight still clutched in his hand. The door was ajar, just as he had found it. The hum was gone. The figure was gone. He scrambled to his feet, his body trembling, and fled the building, never looking back. He never worked a night shift again, and to this day, the sight of an empty office building fills him with an inexplicable dread. Story 2. The Deserted Subway Station. Our second account comes from a young student named Emily, who found herself in a liminal space through a far more mundane, yet equally terrifying, route. Emily was studying late one night at the university library, engrossed in her research, when she realized she had missed the last bus home. Annoyed, she decided to take the subway, even though it was a longer route, and she wasn't familiar with the late-night schedule. She walked to the nearest subway station, a place usually bustling with commuters, but at this hour it was eerily quiet. The fluorescent lights hummed softly, and the only sound was the distant rumble of a train. As she descended the familiar stairs, she noticed something was off. The station seemed larger, the platforms longer, and the air was heavy with the smell of damp concrete and something else, something metallic and acrid. She brushed it off as fatigue, attributing it to her long hours. But then she noticed the advertisements. They were old, faded, and for products she had never seen before. A prickle of unease began to crawl up her spine. She tried to find a schedule, but the information boards were blank. Every sign she tried to read was either faded beyond recognition or displayed gibberish. The air grew heavy, and the silence became oppressive. The distant rumble of the train seemed to grow louder, then fade, then return, as if playing a cruel trick. She was in a liminal space, a deserted subway station that existed outside the normal confines of her city, perhaps even outside of time itself. She walked for what felt like an eternity, the endless platforms lined with faded advertisements. The silence was broken only by her own ragged breathing and the occasional faint sound of distant, distorted whispers. It was a low, guttural murmur that seemed to echo from everywhere and nowhere. She tried to ignore it, tried to rationalize it, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent, more malevolent. She started to run, desperate to escape the suffocating silence and the unsettling whispers. She ran until she collapsed, her legs burning, her lungs aching. The faded advertisements seemed to press in on her, their strange products mocking her despair. The whispers were all around her now, a cacophony of distorted, guttural sounds. She huddled in a corner, covering her ears, trying to block out the terrifying sounds. She felt a cold touch on her shoulder and looked up. Standing over her was a figure, tall and gaunt, its face obscured by shadow. It held a flickering lantern in one hand, and its head was tilted at an unnatural angle. It was a watcher, one of the most feared entities of these deserted stations. Emily screamed, a raw, primal sound that was swallowed by the echoing whispers. She scrambled away, crawling on her hands and knees, the watcher slowly advancing, its head still tilted, its shadowed face seeming to lean closer. She could feel its cold breath on her neck, hear the soft rustle of its clothes. Just as it reached for her, she saw a flicker of light, a brief, almost imperceptible shimmer in the concrete wall. Desperate, she lunged towards it, pushing through the seemingly solid wall. She felt a sensation like falling, a brief moment of disorientation, and then she was back in the familiar subway station, lying on the cold platform, a discarded newspaper beside her. The faded advertisements were gone, replaced by the familiar, brightly lit ads of her city. The whispers were gone. But the memory of that shadowed figure and the chilling, distorted whispers would haunt her dreams for years to come. Story 3. The Endless Highway. Our final chilling account comes from a long-haul truck driver named Frank, a man who had spent countless nights on the open road, accustomed to the monotonous drone of his engine and the endless stretch of asphalt. He was a seasoned veteran, immune to the loneliness of the highway, or so he thought. But one night, on a seemingly ordinary stretch of road, he stumbled onto a highway that defied all logic. He was driving through a remote, desolate area, miles from any town, the only light coming from his headlights and the distant stars. He had been driving for hours, the fatigue starting to set in, when he noticed something strange. The road ahead seemed to stretch endlessly, without any signs of exits, rest stops, or even other vehicles. The landscape on either side was a monotonous blur of trees and empty fields. A cold knot of fear began to tighten in his stomach. He checked his GPS, but the screen was blank, displaying only a static-filled map. He tried his CB radio, but there was no signal, only a low, constant hiss. The air grew heavy, and the silence was absolute, broken only by the drone of his engine. The highway seemed to stretch on forever, the white lines repeating into infinity. He was in a liminal space, a highway that existed outside the normal confines of his route, perhaps even outside of reality itself. He drove for what felt like hours, his sense of time completely distorted. The highway remained the same, an endless loop of asphalt and trees. He tried to rationalize it, to find a logical explanation, but there was none. He was utterly alone, trapped in this unsettling, monotonous space. He started to feel a profound sense of despair, a crushing realization that he might never escape. Then he heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible sound, like the distant wail of a siren. It was a soft, rhythmic sound, like a mournful cry. He froze, his heart pounding. He listened, straining to hear it again. The wail stopped. He waited, his breath held, but it didn't return. He tried to convince himself it was just his imagination, a trick of his exhausted mind. He continued to drive, but now he was hyper-aware of every sound, every shadow. The wail started again, louder this time and closer. It was coming from behind him. He checked his rearview mirror, but saw nothing. The wail grew louder, more insistent, and now he could hear other sounds, faint and numerous, joining in, a chorus of distorted, mournful cries. The air grew heavy, and he felt a suffocating pressure, as if the very air was pressing in on him. Frank gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, his eyes darting between the road ahead and his rearview mirror. The wails were all around him now, a cacophony of distorted, mournful sounds. He could feel a cold presence in the cab with him, a chilling sensation that made his skin crawl. He pressed the accelerator, desperate to outrun whatever was pursuing him, but the highway remained endless, the wails growing louder, more insistent. He saw a flicker of light in the distance, a brief, almost imperceptible shimmer on the horizon. Desperate, he aimed his truck towards it, pushing the engine to its limits. He felt a sensation like being pulled apart and reassembled, a terrifying, agonizing process that lasted only a second, but felt like an eternity. When he opened his eyes, he was back on his familiar highway, the signs for the next town visible in the distance. The whales were gone. The strange, endless highway was gone. He was back on his route, but he was forever changed. He no longer dismissed the stories of liminal spaces as mere fiction. He knew with a terrifying certainty that there were cracks in reality, places where the world could unravel, and that he had, for a brief, horrifying moment, fallen through one of them. He now lives with a constant, low-level anxiety, always checking his rear-view mirror, always wondering when the fabric of his reality might fray again. The endless highway had shown him that the world was not as solid as he believed, and that some horrors exist beyond the realm of logic and reason. Michael's life became a tapestry woven with threads of paranoia and fear. The once familiar office environment, a place of order and predictability, now held a sinister undertone. Every cubicle seemed to hold a hidden secret, every flickering fluorescent light a potential gateway to that endless, humming void. He found himself constantly checking his surroundings, his eyes darting to corners, expecting to see the hunched figure, its back forever turned, its silent presence a chilling reminder of his impossible journey. He tried to explain his experience to his colleagues, but their polite smiles and concerned glances only served to isolate him further. How could he describe the feeling of being in a place that defied all logic, a space where the very air breathed with an unnatural hum? They wouldn't understand. They couldn't. He started having nightmares. Vivid, unsettling dreams of endless beige cubicles, the rhythmic clicking and rustling, and the soft, wet sighs that seemed to emanate from the very walls. He'd wake up in a cold sweat, the faint smell of stale coffee and ozone clinging to him, even though he knew it wasn't real. The fear was insidious, creeping into his waking hours. He found himself avoiding office buildings, feeling a sudden surge of panic. In long corridors or crowded workspaces, the world, once so predictable and logical, now felt fragile, as if at any moment the mundane could peel back to reveal something terrifying and incomprehensible. He often wondered what would have happened if he hadn't found his way out, if he had remained trapped in that endless, humming labyrinth. The thought alone was enough to send shivers down his spine, a chilling reminder that some doors lead to places you can never truly leave behind. He was a survivor, yes, but also a prisoner of his own terrifying experience, forever marked by the hum, the clicks, and the soft, wet sighs. Emily's life was forever altered by her encounter in the deserted subway station. The once comforting rumble of trains, a symbol of urban life, now filled her with a deep-seated anxiety. Every time she stepped onto a subway platform, she'd feel a prickle of unease, a subconscious fear that the familiar advertisements might suddenly fade, that the air might grow heavy with the metallic scent of something unnatural. She found herself meticulously checking the signs, double-checking the train schedules, and always making sure she knew where the emergency exits were. Sleep became a luxury, plagued by nightmares of endless platforms, the rhythmic whispers, and the shadowed figure with the flickering lantern. She'd wake up in a cold sweat, the faint smell of damp concrete and acrid metal clinging to her, even though she was in her own bed. She tried to explain it to her friends, to her family, but their polite skepticism only reinforced her isolation. How could she describe a place that defied all logic, a station that existed outside of time? They offered her medication, coping mechanisms, but nothing could erase the memory of that night. She knew, with a terrifying certainty, that the world was not as solid as it seemed, that there were cracks, hidden dimensions, where unspeakable things resided. She eventually stopped taking the subway, opting for longer, more expensive bus routes, anything to avoid another night in a deserted station. She now lives a quiet life, rarely venturing out after dark, the memory of the watcher, a constant companion. She often wonders if the figure with the lantern ever found its way out, if it's still lurking in some forgotten station, waiting for another unsuspecting traveler to stumble into its domain. The thought alone is enough to send shivers down her spine, a chilling reminder that some encounters leave you forever changed, forever haunted by the liminal. Frank's journey on the endless highway left an indelible mark on his soul. The open road, once a symbol of freedom and adventure, now represented an infinite, terrifying void. Every mile marker, every stretch of desolate highway triggered a fresh wave of anxiety. He'd find himself staring at the rearview mirror, convinced that the wailing siren would start again, that something unseen would try to catch up to him. He started carrying a loaded shotgun in his cab, a futile attempt to create a barrier against the unseen horrors that lurked just beyond his perception. His once jovial demeanor was replaced by a grim, silent intensity. He couldn't focus, his mind constantly replaying the terrifying encounter on the endless highway. He even sought professional help. But how do you explain a liminal space to a therapist? How do you describe a highway that defies the laws of physics, a place where time and space become meaningless? They offered him medication, coping mechanisms, but nothing could erase the memory of that night. He knew with a terrifying certainty that the world was not as solid as it seemed, that there were cracks, hidden dimensions where unspeakable things resided. He eventually quit his job, unable to face another night on the road. He now lives a quiet life, rarely leaving his home, the memory of the endless highway a constant companion. He often wonders if the entities that wailed and pursued him ever found their way off that road, if they're still out there, waiting for another unsuspecting driver to stumble into their domain. The thought alone is enough to send shivers down his spine, a chilling reminder that some encounters leave you forever changed, forever haunted by the liminal. Michael's descent into paranoia deepened with each passing day. He started seeing patterns in mundane objects, convinced they were subtle clues, hidden messages from the liminal space. A stack of papers on a desk, a specific arrangement of office supplies, even the way the dust settled on a windowsill. Everything seemed to hold a sinister significance. He began meticulously documenting these observations in a small notebook, filling pages with frantic scribbles and crude diagrams, trying to decipher the logic of a place that had none. His colleagues, initially concerned, now actively avoided him, whispering about his erratic behavior and the dark circles under his eyes. He lost weight, his once neat appearance replaced by a disheveled, haunted look. The line between his waking life and the nightmares blurred, and he often found himself questioning if he was truly awake, or if he was still trapped in that endless office building, forever searching for an exit that didn't exist. The hum, though no longer physically present, resonated in his mind, a constant, low-frequency thrum that vibrated through his very being. He knew, with a terrifying certainty, that the experience had fundamentally altered him, leaving him with a permanent vulnerability to the unseen. He was a man living on the edge of two realities, forever haunted by the knowledge that the world was far more porous and terrifying than he had ever imagined. The office building, once a symbol of his professional life, had become a personal prison, a constant reminder of the day his sanity brushed against the impossible. Emily's fear of the subway transformed into a broader phobia of enclosed spaces and public transportation. Buses, trains, even crowded elevators became sources of intense anxiety. She found herself walking everywhere, no matter the distance, preferring the open air and the predictable rhythm of the city streets to the unsettling confines of underground tunnels. The memory of the watcher, its shadowed face and flickering lantern, was a constant companion, a chilling specter that haunted her waking hours. She tried therapy again, desperately seeking a way to reclaim her life, but the words still failed her. How could she explain the profound sense of wrongness, the feeling of being observed by something ancient and malevolent? Her therapist, though sympathetic, could only offer conventional coping mechanisms, which felt woefully inadequate against the existential dread that now consumed her. Emily started to isolate herself, finding solace only in the quiet solitude of her apartment, where the only sounds were her own breathing and the distant, muffled sounds of the city. She often wondered about the other people who had stumbled into that deserted subway station, if they too were forever marked by the experience, forever listening for the whispers of the lost. The thought was a cold comfort, a shared burden in a world that refused to acknowledge the horrors she had witnessed. The subway, once a convenient mode of transport, had become a symbol of her shattered sense of security, a chilling testament to the unseen entities that lurk in the forgotten corners of our urban landscapes. Frank's life became a testament to the psychological toll of encountering the liminal. The vast, open expanse of the highway, once his sanctuary, now felt like an infinite trap. He developed a severe case of agoraphobia, unable to tolerate open spaces, the feeling of being exposed and vulnerable to the unseen. He rarely left his small, cluttered apartment, finding comfort in the familiar confines of his four walls. The wailing, though no longer physically present, echoed in his mind, a constant, mournful chorus that drove him to the brink of madness. He tried to drown it out with alcohol, with loud music, with anything that could offer a temporary reprieve, but the sounds always returned, more insistent, more terrifying. He spent hours poring over maps, tracing routes, trying to find a logical explanation for the impossible highway, but every attempt only deepened his despair. He knew, with a terrifying certainty, that he had driven into a place that defied all human understanding, a tear in the fabric of reality that had briefly swallowed him whole. And the worst part, he couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there, waiting, perhaps even watching, for another unsuspecting traveler to stumble into its endless asphalt embrace. The world had become a dangerous place, full of hidden roads and unseen horrors, and Frank was now forever attuned to the subtle shifts, the almost imperceptible changes that signaled the presence of a liminal space. He was a survivor, yes, but also a prisoner of his own terrifying experience, forever marked by the wailing, the pursuit, and the endless highway. His truck, once a symbol of his freedom, now sat rusting in his driveway, a silent monument to the day his reality fractured, leaving him forever haunted by the liminal.